Hey, folks, it was 11 years ago on Off the Record that I was interviewing a guy named Stéphane Richer. Stéphane Richer played for the Cheating Montreal Canadiens and won a couple of Stanley Cups. And I had read somewhere that he had suffered from depression in the 1990s. And I took him aside and said, hey, would it be okay if I asked you how you're doing? And he said, I don't know. It's very painful. So I said to him, if you'll talk about it, I'll talk about it. And he said, well, what would you talk about? And I told him at that point, I'd suffered from depression for about 10 years. So he said, okay, let's do it. We went on the air, talked about it maybe for 90 seconds. And you know what? The next day, started getting emails. Usually I got emails that said, hey, Landsberg, you suck. But these emails were totally different. They all said the same thing, that it was the first time in their lives that they'd seen two men talking about their struggles with mental health without seeming ashamed or embarrassed and without seeming weak. And that is why I can say, welcome to Isolation Nation. We do this on behalf of Sick Not Weak, the charity that me and a handful of others began 4 years ago. That's why we're here, because we understand the power of sharing and because we understand the power of being a smartass. For instance, yesterday with James Wilder on the show, we took his plea to other CFLers to join him in the cause of focusing on police brutality. Take a peek. This is just a sampling of it. I'm Michael Landsberg, quarterback for the Toronto Argos, and
come on, ML, ain't nobody gonna believe that.
Sorry, I left out a word. Take two. I'm Michael Landsberg, former quarterback of the Toronto Argos, and
nah, bro, they ain't gonna do it either.
I did it again. Sorry, gosh, what's wrong with me? Take three. I'm Michael Landsberg, former coach of the Toronto Argos.
Nope.
So that was yesterday. Now, we had hoped to have another box on this screen, James Wilder. We're expecting still that he will join us yesterday at the end of the show. I said to Perdita, hi, Perdita. Hello. I said, you guys are so amazing. You got to join us tomorrow. And we had already said, oh my gosh, we have a great guest to have on that show. So I thought it would be three-way. Orlando Bowen, former CFLer, which isn't necessarily the biggest part of the story. Orlando, how you doing, man?
I'm well. Michael, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for joining us. I'll tell your story briefly in a second, but you know how people accuse the media, right, of taking things out of context? Do you kind of believe that we can do that, Perdita, sometimes?
Sure you do.
Yeah. Orlando, are you suspicious when you see things, you go, did they really mean to say that?
Yeah. That happens.
I want to prove to you that it can happen. So you saw what we did yesterday. I took the same clips from James Wilder and took them into a totally different context. And you tell me if it works. Roll it. Hey, folks, Michael Landsberg here. And I'm not ashamed to say I suffer from a mental illness.
We appreciate you, brother.
Sweet. No shame about that. And no shame at all about this.
Come on, ML. Ain't nobody gonna believe that.
And you know what else? I'm not embarrassed about my hair.
Nah, bro, they ain't gonna do it either.
Okay, then how about badass unconventional?
Nope.
Come on, man. Just admit it. It's kind of sexy.
Bro, really? Just keep it real.
Fine, come cut my hair.
No, bro. Not gonna cut it.
So you admit that you kind of like it. I'm wondering, is it more Sweeney Todd or Cruella de Vil? What do you think?
Bro, I'm about to block you, dog.
Okay, how about this?
Okay, that's a little better.
And just to add this, the mysterious pout?
Yo, there it is right there.
And then the earring. And what?
We stand together.
You see? Seamless. We can do that. We have the power to do that. You can make people say anything you want. And I wanted to do that to show you that. But most of all, I wanted to do that to show people just how bad my hair is and how crazy it is to go 3.5 months without getting a haircut. Perdita, if you and I were married, and that'd probably be a better deal for me than it would be for you, would you cut my hair?
I would. In fact, I've tried to get, my mom wears her hair really short, and I've asked her, Mom, let me cut your hair. She will not let me at all. I'm craving to cut somebody's hair. I have no skill, no experience, but I feel like I could pull it off.
My wife tried to do the same thing. Oh my gosh. She came up to me on Sunday with this razor. Can you hand me the razor, Care? She came up on Sunday with this razor, and she goes, I'll just take a little off. And before you know it, she's going,
just a little bit.
Totally out of control.
Yeah. Orlando, do you cut your own hair?
I do. Best barber in the land.
It's so easy. You're like a clean shaven. That's so easy.
It is.
That's it right here.
That's it.
Now I live in fear of this. I can't turn it off. Oh my gosh. Help me. There we go. Okay, Orlando. So let's get into the reason why your story is so important and so relevant and so painful, I'm sure, for you at this time. In 2004, you were waiting some friends in a parking lot. And I'm not telling you this. I mean, obviously, you know this. I'm telling folks that are watching. And you were approached by a couple of police officers. Correct me if I say anything that's wrong. Eventually, they ended up beating you very badly, very severely. You had a concussion. There's pictures that we've all seen from the newspaper where your eyes are closed. It was horrible. And they also planted cocaine in your car, and you were charged with resisting arrest, assaulting police officers, and possession of cocaine. Is that all correct?
That is all correct.
And that was in 2004. And eventually you were found not guilty, not that they dropped the charges. You were pretty careful to make sure that you actually took this to a verdict, right?
Yeah. Initially, there were some things that happened during the case. Namely, one of the officers was himself arrested for trafficking. And when that happened, even though it wasn't made public that was happening, we have some folks in media that gave us the heads up. And then the Crown attorney came and said, there's some things that may compromise the case, but it's not about that. We want to make sure that you're good, and we don't think it would be fair to you to go through all of this. So why don't you just let us drop the charges? And we said, absolutely not.
Good.
Because we didn't want there to be any confusion or folks thinking, well, maybe they dropped it just because there wasn't enough evidence, but he was still guilty. I wanted a ruling based on the merits of our case, regardless of what was happening anywhere else. We wanted a judgment and a verdict. So
they tried to actually make themselves look good, like they were being sensitive, which ultimately, if you had believed that and gone with that, that would have cleaned their record a little bit by saying, hey, you know what? We realized that we'd made a mistake, but that wasn't the way it was. And fortunately for you, because that must have been ridiculously, I don't know if tempting is the right word, but if you had, you went back to the judge and you got a verdict. If you would have been found guilty, what could you have been sentenced to? Yeah,
I try not to even cross the bridge in terms of how much time I may have spent in prison. I'm just like, we just deal with what's in front of us and not try to, I have a friend of ours that says, don't go too far across the bridge, right? And start worrying about things that you can't control. But for us, I wanted it to be clear and unequivocal that I was innocent. And I wanted that to be on the merits of our case, regardless of what was happening anywhere else at any time.
So today there was a funeral. There has been more talk about police brutality. Well, I was going to say, probably since your awful experience with the cops in 2004, but that's not true. I mean, there was Ferguson, Missouri. This is not the first time that there has been outrage at how cops have dealt with, in seems like every case that we see, African Americans. There was Eric Garner. I mean, there's been a whole bunch of incidents. What's that like for you when it does come into the news, and especially this time, where the result was so devastating, the video was so clear for everybody to see?
I think that what was different about, so it's painful every time. It's traumatic, I think, every time, not just for me having lived through something like that, but for, like most who have ever come into an experience like that or know someone who has. So I think what was different about this time was there's a narrative that usually happens around the assaults, right? So usually it's like, well, we don't have all sides. Let's wait for more information. We don't know if he actually died because of this particular maneuver. Let's wait for the autopsy, those types of things. This situation was, I think, different because downtown, broad daylight, people all around, people recording what was happening, people pleading for the life of George Floyd, and yet there was this kind of stoic, emotionless, just resting of the knee on his neck. And so I think when you have people pleading for someone's life and crying out, I didn't know how the video ended when I first saw it. So I was actually pleading along with folks as well, saying like, come on, like someone's gonna intervene, right? Like it's not gonna end like this, like come on, right? So I think some of the things that were different was the response. So the firing of the officers the next day, what the police.
Eventually they were charged.
Yeah, so they were charged with the murder, right? Eventually, but just the vibe around people experiencing it, almost like minute by minute, just from a humanity perspective, it's different this time.
So Orlando Bowen joining us 2004, he had, run-in with the police implies that, if I have a run-in with someone who I grew up with, that would imply that there was mutual guilt. Right. Whereas, you were brutalized by a couple of police officers, and there's no other side of the story. I can say that because no other side of the story has ever been proven or after your trial suggested. Yeah. So I'm wondering, since we talked first and foremost about mental health on this show, what did that do to your mental health? Because that was 2004, 16 years ago. PTSD would I'm sure be a factor, and it's more in vogue now to talk about it than it was back then. Anxiety, depression. What did this do to you?
Yeah, so the assault itself was, I think, the first transgression, if you will. And it was like there was this level of shock around the assault itself. But I think what really took it to another level was the cover-up, right? It was the, being taken to jail, not being allowed to call anyone. So being denied my right to a phone call, being denied medical attention, and then having them plant drugs in my car. Like it was just, and then charging me with assault and possession of a controlled substance. That to me was something that we had to live in. Like, the assault is physical, it happens, and then, part of it is like, am I gonna make it? Am I gonna live? Okay, I'm still alive, but then I'm still having to relive the injustice of the whole situation, because now I'm on trial for something that everybody involved knows what the truth is, but I'm on trial. And through tax dollars, I'm actually paying for I'm paying for this, for what's happening to me. That was difficult. I think that was the more challenging part.
So between then and now, how has your mental health been? The kind of experience that you went through very seldom can be simply put behind us without a great deal of effort, a great deal of time, a great deal of therapy, a great deal of many things.
Yeah. So, it's been difficult for sure, bearing witness to what happened, because again, like, I saw myself there on the pavement, so it's hard, to totally like disassociate, because not many people, I guess, in that type of scenario really live to be able to talk about it, which in and of itself, it presents a challenge for me. But one of the things that was really important to me in terms of even why I came back to Canada, why I left the US to come back to Canada, was for an opportunity to serve and to give back and to make a difference. So, you know, the notion that we could go through a traumatic experience and actually grow through it, actually be better, be more connected to people, have more clarity around your purpose is what I committed to. We were like, we're not gonna let this situation define our possibilities, define who we are. We can't control what people say in terms of, you know, hey, isn't that the guy that blah, blah, blah. That's gonna be what it is. But in terms of how we look at this, we're going to use it to help other people as they navigate what may seem like insurmountable obstacles or challenges. So I did have to go to therapy. There were some challenges in terms of just anxiety. Probably some came from lack of sleep, but some of that came from just having conversations with my friends who were in the system, working in the system, telling me, be careful, man, you know, watch out, right? And I'm like, what does that mean? And they were kind of like, I can't really say, you just have to be careful. So I'm like, okay, shoot, like, all right, I don't know what that means. They're not really going into detail. So I guess I have to just stay ready. And that, you know, hyper vigilant state has a toll on, you know, your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. You know, it's just, especially over a long period of time. And so, you know, threw myself into just serving and making a difference and spending energy that way. And that was helpful, as was, you know, just having folks that I could talk to about it and talk through the journey. But yeah, it's not easy for sure. But I also understand that there are reasons why my life didn't end, right? And because of that, I'm grateful. And because of that, I find the many things in my life to be thankful for and focus on those things versus on a challenge around a circumstance that I can't change. All I could do is release the emotion of those moments so that I could be fully present.
Perdita, listening to Orlando's story, and I know that you guys know each other. I don't know how, but I'm going to assume, you know, first of all, you know, upper level sports, people tend to, you know, like professional athletes, top amateur athletes, you're eventually going to be at the same sort of function. What did you make of his story? What thoughts? I know you know his story, but what thoughts are going through your mind as you're hearing that?
Yeah, I think, Orlando, we know each other because I think, you know, Sky, your wife, my husband, Morgan, kind of grew up together, and, you know, we all kind of know each other through the grapevine. So I knew about Orlando's story through my husband, Morgan, who, you know, used to be a reporter at the Toronto Star. So I remember hearing about it, you know, from him. I used to be a crime reporter for a while before he switched to sports. And, you know, even hearing Orlando discuss it now, one of the things that jumps out to me is there was no video for Orlando, right? So he had to go through this traumatic experience. There was no social media, right? There was none of this public jury and none of this. So what about all the people who don't have videos to vindicate them? What about all the people who there's not a crooked cop or track record to show? And Orlando, I feel like part of the reason where you're like, no, we're taking this to trial is to send a message. And also you knew that you were not guilty of anything that was said against you, right? And you also have a really strong spirit. What about all the people who don't have that kind of voice or presence, or are just simply exhausted and don't want to go through it? And, you know, I think about that, and, you know, the effects of, we're talking a lot about mental health, and I haven't had, you know, major concerns in my life, but I know that the effects of even this George Floyd case and, you know, other acts of racism, it's fatiguing to have to combat. You worry, you kind of, you know, think about, you know, do I have control over my life? Does my existence mean anything? And I don't want anyone to think that Blackness is a crime or a burden. We're not saying that at all. And even Orlando, when I hear you saying, you know, I'm focusing on the good of my life, I'm not thinking about necessarily PTSD, but I'm looking at basically how I can turn this into a triumphant story and what continues on. To me, that's the beauty in this struggle. And, at this point in time, I don't want anyone to get it misconstrued that Blackness is something that we're feeling hampered by. Not at all. But I do worry about all the people behind bars or in jail who are struggling right now because of acts of racism or being discriminated against. We see George Floyd because we have that video. What would have happened if we didn't have that video?
Right.
I think most of us would make the assumption that probably nothing would have happened unless it was actually on the street where it was. Even if there wasn't video, there was a lot of people, around, obviously. But when Orlando was assaulted by police officers, there was nobody around. And, the law will always, I would imagine, historically would favor two white cops over one Black citizen. It just, that may not be fair, but that's kind of my take, Orlando.
Yeah. I would agree. I agree with that. Not that I would agree. I agree with that. And that is part of the challenge. Because even if you look at the George Floyd case, the conversation was that, well, he was resisting, right? Until there was evidence to disprove that. So you talk about the injurious act of the assault and then the injurious commentary that gets reported that is sent to his family. Those are the things that I have challenge with. The act in and of itself, I have a huge issue with, but there are things that lend itself to that act being possible, which I have a bigger challenge with, because the act doesn't start, on its own. There's a thought process that happens before the act.
Perdita, you know the sports world intimately, and we're all very familiar, obviously, with your career and the World Championship, and then the disappointment of Greece, and a million other things. If you were still competing, and if the Olympics were coming up as they were supposed to be coming up, I'm sure you were going to be there, right, for television.
Yes.
But if you would have been competing, do you think you would have used the platform, this worldwide platform, to make some kind of statement if we were in exactly the same time we are right now?
One of the things that Black people, Black athletes really have to decide is whether you're going to stand up for your integrity or whether or not you're going to stand up for your job. And speaking up against racism and acts of injustice, things that really are polarizing conversations, you run the risk of that as a person of color. So I wrestle with that question, Michael. And here's what I will say. The 20-year-old me, the 25-year-old me, I don't know that I would have a strong enough voice to say something. And the 39-year-old me is like, I don't give a damn. I don't care what Nike says. Sponsored by them for 10 years. I would speak up now, but that is the risk. And you've seen the conversations where, NFLers speak out and look at Colin Kaepernick's protesting peacefully, completely lost his career over it. LeBron James speaks out against injustice. People are saying, shut up and dribble. That's your job. And it's almost like you can't be two things. You can't be Black and an activist. You can't be Black and also speak out against injustice if you're speaking out against white people. There's something, that is unacceptable about that. So to answer your question, I would think long and hard about doing this. And I cringe even saying it, but I'm all about being honest and being transparent. I think this generation is one that is saying, don't mess with us, right? All you racists, get the hell on. I actually feel like this is a bit of a revolution and things are going to change. But I don't know if, Orlando, you feel it back when you were competing or back when I was competing. I don't think there was a safe enough space to speak as candidly as we are right now without some form of, retribution or retaliation.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like, some of the things that people hold, close, near, dear to their heart as factual gets challenged in situations like this. Right? You can't, the evidence is indisputable, right? But in the absence of that evidence, it's like, my wife and I have 3 boys, and we used to have these blocks with letters on them, and they would build the blocks up, and those blocks, there's a foundation to them, right? And if you are to think or to challenge someone's thinking around, well, there are systemic issues, it's like pulling one of those blocks out. And people are like, no. It's easier to not have to deal with that as a thought or as a fact, right? Because if you have, if that you could pull that block out that represents someone's truth, then it's going to challenge them to think, well, what else am I holding on to as part of this foundation that might not be true? And that shakes people to their core.
Orlando, I asked this question to Perdita yesterday, and I ask it to all our guests. I asked you about your mental health, and you said, for the most part, shockingly, even though you have had challenges, it hasn't dominated your life, which it very well could have, given the trauma that you experienced. But one of the questions that I think is equally important to ask a guest in this situation is, over the course of your adult life, say, has there been somebody in your life that you cared about who struggled with a real mental health battle?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got someone a number of young people actually in our family. We had one of the beauties of what has happened through the pandemic is that our family has been gathering weekly. Our extended family has been gathering weekly on platforms like Zoom, and we put real conversations on the table, and a number of the young people have vocalized how they're challenged by the current situation, by things that have happened in the past, the fact that they had reached out for help quietly, and then we had other people, like folks who were like rocks for us, that were saying, you're actually not alone, because when I was younger, this is what I experienced. And we're looking around like, seriously? Like you? So, we know that these things happen, and it's been brought to the table over this last little bit.
No, how many times were you a guest on Off the Record? Like 5, 6 times, am I right?
Perhaps somewhere around there. I was blessed to have that opportunity.
Thank you for saying that, and probably not as blessed as we were to have you. And my question, though, is, if someone would have said to you at the time, hey, Landsberg, big mouth, blah, 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 thinks he's so great, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I heard a lot of that. But, he suffers from pretty severe depression. What would you have said?
I don't believe you. I don't believe you. He's got it together. He's on point. He's sharp. He's making things happen. I would have had a hard time believing.
Yeah. And I think, Perdita, there's a real lesson there that I try to use myself as an example, which is, if we don't want you to know what we're experiencing, and when I say you, I don't mean you specifically, but people in general, then, as Orlando said with his family, the rock can perhaps be cracking and nobody knows.
And it hits onto something that James Wilder, who was a guest yesterday, said. He said, social media can kind of feed into that, right? This idea that we have, Instagram, for example, this perfectly curated feed, and all you see of anyone's life is their vacation here, or their happy marriage, or their brilliant this and that. And I think one of the pitfalls of that is you think everyone's life is happy and joyous. But I think conversations like this are important, and putting them out on public platforms, it's like airing your dirty laundry, but is important because what you're saying, what you're giving someone else permission to say, I'm imperfect too. My life isn't perfect either. And, adults can usually cope with things, right? But I think especially young people who don't have perspective, don't have the skills, who are feeling bullied or peer pressure, they absolutely need to see that. They need to see that we are imperfect, that things happen. They also need to know that you can come out of that, right? Michael, that's your story. Orlando, that's your story. That these issues, these problems are temporary, right? You can live happily with them. But if you pick a permanent solution like ending your life, you can't get that back. You can't get that back. So I think having to talk about it time and time again, even if it feels redundant to you, someone else is hearing it for the first time, and you might be giving, if just one person giving them hope. To me, it's important to just continue these conversations.
Orlando, when Perdita just mentioned the word, and I try to use it in as many different ways and situations I can, which is going to sound kind of weird because the word is suicide. But, the fact is that suicide, it's like a virus that spreads and grows and feasts off silence. if you're a 16-year-old kid and no one has ever said to you the idea of suicide, the idea of having suicidal ideation, the fact that suicide for someone of that age is the leading cause of death, if no one has told you that your struggles are not unlike all kinds of people across Canada and the world, then how are you ever going to mention it to someone? And that's why I asked this question. Have you been touched by suicide by somebody you care about? Obviously not you.
Well, we've had some challenges like family, friends, right? So some of our friends' children, some of our like our sons' friends, or guys that they may have played sports with, that have died by suicide. So it's definitely touched our lives, and I think that's why Perdita mentioned it, right? Like sometimes the young people may not have the perspective. Perdita talked about the fact that maybe at 19 or 20 or 25, she may not have been the one or willing to like stand up, right? But now because of her perspective, it's different, right? And sometimes, like people act out of what they believe to be possible. They act out of what they know to be their lens through which they're experiencing life. That is why we were able to I personally was able to let go of the things that I was dealing with, because I know that if we could give perspectives to young people around what's possible, we could save them. And there have been times, a number of times, that we've been in spaces with young people and with adults in corporate settings where we share, and then they come and they express to us that they were either planning to or they had tried to take their life, but the perspective that they gained from the interaction helped them understand that their life is worth it and that it gets better, but you just have to keep going. So it's because of those things. That's, for me, that was actually one of the things that had me in this anxious state, because I was just like, oh my gosh, how many more young people are having those thoughts but don't have someone to say something and intervene? And that's like, that to me was just, that triggered anxiety for me, because I stopped sleeping and just saying, I lost myself in, we have to write grants, we have to get support for these kids, we have to connect them, I don't care what it takes. And that took a toll, right? So it's so important and so significant for us to put it out there in terms of what we've dealt with, and also be that light, beacon, voice, or just a shoulder or an ear to listen, right? Those things are incredibly important.
Perdita, I asked Orlando the question: have you been touched by suicide by somebody that you care about?
Yeah, thankfully, no one that I know personally has died by suicide, but someone extremely close to me, a family member, did admit to me that they thought about it, and they were really close to going into the garage and ending everything, and just had difficulty with managing their children, who were just really, really hard to parent. I had no idea. And that's the scary thing that I'm learning. And, I'm really new to this conversation around mental health, because we didn't have, language for it growing up. Yeah. But I'm understanding that there is no face of it. There's no age for it. There's no class for it. It doesn't respect boundaries or borders or race, any of those things. Anyone can suffer for it. So when this person admitted this to me, calling me in tears, it almost like shocked me. I love you. I'm this close to you. We talk so often, and this is your reality. I would have never known. And so I think sometimes there can be a facade. So I've learned, as someone who really wants to be an advocate and understand more, is just to check in on your strong friends, checking on people who are managing a lot but seem to have it all together. I don't even necessarily know if that's the right approach. Maybe, Michael, you can tell me if that is or not. But I'm really learning that sometimes when you think that someone has it all together, they might be the ones that need the help the most, because it's too much to bear. But you wouldn't know it.
Without a doubt. I mean, that's why I asked Orlando the question. He knew me at a time in my life, different times in my life, when I was probably, really severely depressed. And I asked him, would you have thought that? And he said no. So, that proves that people with mental health challenges that you can't see. I mean, you can't hide a broken femur, right? I mean, your leg's in a cast. It's not like you can try to fool people. But since there's no visible sign of our mental illness, there's nothing on the outside. We are free to lie about it. We are free to cover it up. We are free to pretend that we're okay. And there's a really important lesson there, which is that just because you think someone is okay doesn't mean they are. I mean, I did all of these shows, and not once did a viewer ever say to me, are you okay? Not once, not one time, even though back in 2008, I did like 210 shows, and every one I was lower than the one before. And every one was painful for me to even look into the camera. I found that I couldn't look people in the eyes. For some reason, I had this crazy symptom. I couldn't look at the camera like this, so I was looking slightly off camera. I mean, I couldn't believe when people didn't say, oh my gosh, like, why aren't you looking at the camera? It's possible to hide so much from people, and that's really scary, right? Because you don't know if you don't ask, and sometimes if you ask, you still don't find out. And it's an important lesson to learn that we don't always know what's going on inside somebody's head. Okay, I got to lighten this a little bit. The song written by Sean Cullen, produced by Sean Cullen, performed by Sean Cullen. This was for you, Perdita. This was for you, or is for you, Orlando, and was for James Wilder,
where's that guy? Where is he?
I'm sure he's got a good reason. We did work on the math of the time difference, though. He's in Houston, right? And there's an hour time difference. So neither one of us perhaps are math wizards on this. But here's Sean Cullen with a song for you two and the other guy. Roll it.
Right.
It's a nation in isolation. It's a nation in isolation. It's a difficult situation. It's a nation in isolation. It's more fun than the colonic irrigation. Perdita Felicien, she is a hurdling world champion. James Wilder Jr., he's a running back, but now he's a part of the Alouettes attack, yeah. Orlando Bowen played in the CFL. Now he's back with a story he can tell. Years ago he was beaten by the cops. Now he's speaking up so the violence will stop, yeah. It's a nation in isolation. It's a difficult situation. It's a nation in isolation. I think I've got a bowel irritation, yeah.
Right on, Sean Cullen.
Am I wrong to say it's just really catchy?
It is really catchy.
I'm worried about you guys. I mean, you can't catch the virus, obviously, through social media, but you can catch the song that will repeat over and over in your head. Orlando, I'm sorry to complicate your life because you said before you had trouble sleeping. That could happen again tonight when you hear Sean Cullen. It's a nation in isolation. One time on the show, we tried to sing together. It didn't go well for me. It didn't go well for me at all.
I don't peg you as a singer.
Yeah.
No, I can't. I can't. We Landsbergs are terrible. Oh my gosh, we're all worse than the next. But that's why I was thinking of giving up Judaism. I was going to go to a religion that didn't have so many songs, right? Because it's humiliating all the time. You can't pick your religion though based on that. I don't think, can you? I don't think Scientology has songs.
No.
Yeah, I don't know.
You're not a Scientologist, either one of you, right?
No.
Okay. That would be
Tom Cruise is. You could ask him.
Oh, don't get me started. Well, I mean, he made a huge mistake once on. He was talking to Matt Lauer. Speaking of huge mistakes,
Matt Lauer.
What's that?
Matt Lauer's huge mistakes. Yeah.
Yeah, but he, Tom Cruise, was talking about antidepressants and how they were evil and how Tom Cruise knew and Matt Lauer didn't understand. And it was hugely damaging to the cause that I embrace, which is that if you're sick, really sick, you have to make the declaration, I will fight for my happiness with everything that's available. Everything is available, whether it's medication, whether it's therapy, whether it's anything that's in between. Because if you give up your life to this illness, if you do not treat this illness, then it's time you can't get back, right? You know, suicide is the greatest tragedy, but it's also a tragedy to be sick and untreated, especially when there's treatments that are available. So, yeah, I still love Top Gun, though. What can I say?
Never seen it.
Never seen Top Gun?
No. I hear a lot about it, but I've never seen it.
Bowen, come on. You've seen Top Gun, right?
I have. It's one of my wife's favorites.
Mav and Goose, was it? Was it Mav and Goose and the rest? Thanks for doing this, guys. Perdita, thanks for coming back again today. And, you know, my family talked a lot about you after last night's show. Oh my God, they kept saying, my God, she's so wonderful and so lovely. And I made the point, look, she's not that great. She's pretty great, but she's not that great. And Orlando, I mean, I loved you in 2002 and 2003 when we kept bringing you back because you had an intelligence to you combined with a combativeness that make for really good television or radio or anything. And I'm glad that your life is in a good spot. And there's a lesson that I learned from you. And I learned from another friend of mine named Peter Burgess, and he was struggling with real depression and nothing was working for him. And he decided he was going to go work at a soup kitchen. And, you know, he said it changed his life because he got out of his own head. He didn't wake up thinking about, oh my gosh, the pain that I'm experiencing. Oh my gosh, my life is over. Oh my gosh, I can't battle this any longer. So he went, and it was not about him and his struggle, but it was about others and their struggles. And it saved him. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for this platform. Thank you for having me on ×2. So it's been fun.
You know, I can't see Orlando, your hair. Can you put your chin down? Because this seldom happens to.
You can't see this.
Yeah,
that's a lot of hair.
Yeah, I mean, I just got it done for you, man. Like.
That is, I mean, there's a lot of shine coming off the top of your head, which is, you know, not a lot of us can say that. And it's certainly the best way to make it through this challenge where our wives or our spouses, you know, come at us with this.
The razor. You better hide that thing.
What'd you say? She said she'll do it when I'm sleeping. All right, bring it on. Thanks, guys. I hope to talk to you, both of you, really soon. And Orlando, good to see you, man.
You as well, man. Take care.
All right.
Take care, guys. See you later.
Hey, by the way, James Wilder. No, we don't need you. Don't come begging back.
He missed a good one.
Come on, James.
Come on, James.
Come on, James.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah, we will.
Next time on Isolation Nation. Roll it, Phil.
Bye, guys.
All right.